Hello, today I'm tasting a wine from the Spanish region of Calatayud. Not necessarily a region that sort of first comes to your mind when you think of high quality Spanish wines, but a region that's really experiencing quite a resurgence at the moment. It's a wine made by a former colleague of mine, somebody called Norrel Robertson, who's a fellow master of wine. It's a wine called Manga del Brujo, which evidently is, it means the sleeves of the wizard, but it's a wine made evidently in homage to the architecture of Papa Luna, who was a 15th century designer of churches whose buildings are seen a lot in this region in Zaragoza in Aragón. The wine is principally old vine Garnacha. And I think there's something in the naming there that's sort of suggesting that these old vines are part of the landscape and the architecture of the region. As I say, the winemaker Norrel Robertson he's a Scot. He's a former colleague of mine. We both worked at Oddbins together. He moved to Spain, took his family with him, because he'd seen that these vineyards in Aragón were becoming abandoned, some of these fantastic old vineyards, because they're quite high up. They're between 600 and 800 metres above sea level, and they're hard to work because they're individual vines on stakes. They're not trellised, they're not easily mechanised, so you're doing all the labour by hand there on hillside sites, on poor soils. So they were becoming abandoned because the families who'd owned them just weren't getting the reward for all the work they were doing, because these were going into some quite basic wines. Now, Norrel saw the potential of these vineyards and had the marketing ability to sell them as quality wines. I mean, this wine evidently at one stage, I'm told, was the house wine at El Bulli, when that was the best restaurant in the world. So I think that's quite a good indication that this is a great value for money and individualistic and high quality wine. The wine, as I say, is mostly old vine Garnacha or Grenache. So the blend is actually very similar to a Chateauneuf du Pape in as much as the majority, the 70% of it is Garnacha, with 15% of Syrah. And then there's another variety known locally as Provençal, which is actually Bourbon, so a Spanish grape variety. And then there's 5% of Malzuelo goes in there to make up the balance of that. The wine has received extended maceration, so the Grenache skins particularly were worked quite hard to take solids out of those. I think 2020, which is the vintage we've got here, was quite an early vintage. It came about 2 weeks earlier than is normal for picking in this area. And as a result, the wines have a lovely freshness as well as a good maturity. They're not sort of overly ripe. There's not a sort of a curranty nature to them. That's my understanding anyway. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? First thing to say is the colour has a wonderful vibrancy to it. It's probably medium in intensity, and it's a ruby red. But it's not, I mean, the pigmentation seems quite dark, but it's not deep. I can see straight through it. It's almost like a sort of it's heading towards some of the darkest rosés I've seen. There's not a huge depth to the colour. So let's have a look at the aromas. Smelling that's quite closed in on itself, quite brooding, quite savoury. There's a slight lifted, almost floral, sort of violety sort of note on the nose. There's certainly liveliness. There's not there's not an overripe richness there. It's not getting to sort of a pruny sort of note or anything like that. So let's have a taste. Tasting that, the first thing to say is, according to the label, that has 15% alcohol. I believe it's 14.81% or something like that, but 15% alcohol. And it's not coming across as alcoholic. It's got a lovely structure that's interwoven through the wine. The fruit and the tannins are both working together really seamlessly. And those tannins are giving a sort of a very classic sort of white peppery note that's running through the wine. There's a lovely juiciness, there's good acidity. It's coming through almost as sort of top notes of ripe red cherries. Not quite getting to an overripe stage where if you're getting sort of lots of black cherry note. There's a vibrancy and a freshness. There's a freshness on the finish. And the mouth-watering nature of the acidity is carrying on right to the end. And that's lifting the sort of the lovely, fresh, vibrant fruit with all those sort of spicy notes in with it right to the end. So there's complexity throughout the wine. It's got weight, as I say, it's a bit more sort of medium to full bodied. It's not huge, it's not blockbusting. And like I say, the alcohol's not showing a lot of heat, which is quite surprising. This is a wine of real sort of self-assurance. It's not too big or standing out, but it has length, depth, elegance, and they're all sort of beautifully seamlessly put together. I think that's a lovely wine, a great value alternative to a Southern Rhone wine. In fact, I'm probably belittling it by saying that, because I think it stands on its own. It's got its individual character and it's delicious. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you'll watch again. Bye now.